The reason you're all here today clicking on this video is because the vast majority of Fire Emblem chapters are awesome. Some feature incredible mechanics, some challenge you in fair and fun ways, and others make for epic set pieces that will make you a lifelong fan of the series. But there are also a few that slip through the cracks. The ones with mechanics you can't imagine anyone ever enjoys. The ones that send you up the wall with the most unfair artificial difficulty you've ever seen. And even a few whose presentation is middling. Those are the chapters I want to look at today, as I picked the worst one in every single Fire Emblem game. We start of course with Shadow Dragon, making this also probably a good moment to say that I'll be considering remakes only for the relevant games. And honestly, considering the map designs in this game are older than the majority of us here, the quality is exceptionally high. Sure, there are flaws present in almost every chapter, some more than others, but on average I'd say the map quality is higher than you might think if this is one of the games in the series you've never played. But enough compliments, we're here to rag on the worst chapter in the game, and two of them immediately jump out to me. The first is the Wooden Cavalry, chapter 13, a map overloaded with ballistas with massive range, and in some cases even movement options. You'd better hope your best units aren't flyers, otherwise you'll really struggle with this one, and even if not, this is still a difficult chapter that can easily feel unfair. What also doesn't help is the free lane layout, with your units separated at the start, which is always a hit or miss setup in my opinion. But to make matters even worse, since ballistas have a massive range, they'll have no problem hitting units in other lanes. Even if well prepared, you're gonna need some luck to beat this chapter. While I have just made a compelling case, if I say so myself, as to why the Wooden Cavalry is Shadow Dragon's worst, I actually think there is one that's even further beneath it, and that mostly has to do with the placing of the map. The final chapter of the game, chosen by fate, is not exactly the grand ending the first ever Fire Emblem game deserved. It doesn't put your army together for one final march, but instead separates them all over the map, some even locked behind doors. These doors open and close at random, which you cannot know your first time around, making it not only for an incredibly annoying mechanic, but an absolute nightmare if you didn't bring door keys or thieves. And considering the doors are open during the battle preparations, why would you? This chapter also has a boatload of reinforcements, and the final boss, Medeus, is very tough to even damage with anything that isn't a Manakete or the Falchion. So yeah, assuming you don't warp yourself over to him, you're in for a long, grueling battle, which is barely enjoyable by the end of it. And it's a shame that will be your final taste of the game. We continue with Gaiden, or Shadows of Valentia, and if you ask me, this game has by far the worst maps in Fire Emblem history. They are way too short and cramped, to the point they almost remind me of Heroes at times. And to make matters even worse, most of them are janky as well. Genuinely the only way I beat some of these is by abusing the retreat feature, to the point I'm kinda thinking the developers intended for that, which would be a shocking design decision if so. Lowlights include Nui Baba's Abode, the final map, and the infamous Swamps of Duma, which is not just annoyingly difficult, but also a nightmare to retreat abuse since it takes so incredibly long to go through the swamp water. However, in my opinion, the absolute worst of the worst is the Desert Stronghold, courtesy of Celica's route. This map is reminiscent of Nui Baba's Abode, with the caveat that it's a desert map, so your units move even slower. The entire design of this map is set up as a huge advantage for the enemies, with the most of them being archers that can easily hit you from long range, while your units on foot cannot easily get to them. I don't even remember how often I retreated while playing this map. It was a constant loop of Leon killing someone, and retreating, and doing it again, until the numbers dwindled down. I truly hate this map. In a game filled with terrible ones, it's the absolute worst. Mystery of the Emblem is next, where we will of course use the new version on DS, meaning all Book 1 maps aren't in consideration. For this game, I truly cannot separate two candidates, mostly because I would consider them the worst for completely different reasons. First, let's look at the worst map based on reasons we've discussed before. Annoying mechanics, unfair enemies, slog to play, etc. From that angle, Anri's Way, chapter 11, is easily the worst. This map is completely covered in desert tiles, meaning anyone that doesn't fly or uses magic is a nightmare to move along. To further complicate things, the map is crowded with aggressive wyverns who can easily end your squishy units with one attack or double team your stronger units if you end up in their range. Now they are flying units, meaning they're weak to bows and wind magic, so if you get the first chance to attack, they're perfectly manageable, but that is a big if. While this chapter usually doesn't become absolutely grueling, it's a little too easy for that, it's still simply not a fun map, and the worst in the game from this perspective. However, there is another map that sucks for completely different reasons. Chapter 3X, a paralogue called Lurking Shadows. This map is incredibly small, and there's so little challenge here, it borders on offensive. The only somewhat engaging part is rescuing Riz, but it's not like that's too difficult, and even if you were to fail, you'll be getting new clerics soon enough anyway. This is such a nothing burger of a map, which is honestly kinda rare throughout the Fire Emblem series, so that's why I also think it's a suitable candidate for worst in the game, albeit for completely different motivations. Whichever reason you find more offensive is up to you. My pick would probably be Enri's Way, but it's pretty close regardless. Onto Genealogy of the Holy War, which lives and dies by its enormous maps. There are some I would consider among the best in the series, but others suffer heavily from it. One such example is Chapter 9, For Whose Sake, which is like a culmination of some of the worst maps we've seen in other games. The terrain suits the enemy much better than it does you, making things feel unfair. It bombards you with wyvern after wyvern after wyvern, and to top it off, there are also ballistas trying to shoot your own flyers out of the sky. But at least it's a cool set piece though, and the map isn't all bad. So for me, it doesn't go farther than a dishonorable mention, and has to watch from the sidelines as Chapter 2, Disturbance or Crisis in Augustria, gets crowned as the absolute worst one. First of all, the beginning feels like complete RNG to decide who survives and who doesn't, which is never fun. Then, it becomes the poster child of why FE4's chapters are too big, by having you go back and forth throughout the map, and that just doesn't work. Fire Emblem and backtracking don't go well together, I never want to see that again. We stay in Jugdral for Phrasia 776, which scales the maps back to the size we're used to. While there is definitely some jank found in this title, I don't think the maps here are too horrible, but before revealing the questionable winner, I do want to put the spotlight on Across the River, which can become one of the most grueling maps in the series if you go in blind and make the wrong moves. If you don't, either on purpose or accidentally, it's not that bad, but if your units become scattered, you'll be drowning in reinforcements and water after the first bridge collapses and your units tumble down. I've never liked maps that are way better prepared than blind, so I'm not a fan of Across the River, but at least avoiding the biggest problems is equally as realistic to happen naturally. The same doesn't apply to the Hero of Winds, Chapter 4X. Not only is it incredibly cramped, and the enemies are much stronger than you'd be used to at this point, it's also a Fog of War map, which, as we'll see with other games coming up, is an easy map mechanic to spiral completely out of control into unfair territory. It also doesn't help that the main objective of Save and Set and Esbel is way too easy, making this chapter a bizarre combination between frustrating and unsatisfying at the same time. On to the GBA for our next entry, the Binding Blade. My thoughts on this game are pretty similar to Shadows of Valentia, and that I really want to like and enjoy it, and to a certain extent I do, but man, the maps are not helping. So many chapters in this game feel like they're not supposed to be beaten blind and fair, but expect the player to abuse the game's mechanics and find a way around Roy being flat out terrible. Chapter 21, the title chapter, is in my opinion easily the hardest map in the game, to the point I have never, in all my playthroughs, beaten it without casualties. Flying reinforcements make for a nightmare of a constant barrage of enemies that can easily make their way over to your squishy units in the back, which, don't forget, includes the lord that may not be killed and only promotes after this chapter. The map also requires you beat it within 30 turns in order to access the following paralogue, which sounds like a lot, but the fact that it really isn't says enough about how grueling this chapter is. But the thing is, it isn't even the worst. Chapter 21 is difficult to unfair levels, but at least it's not too terribly designed. Arcadia, Chapter 14, is like Intelligent Systems set out to make the worst chapter of all time, and if that is the case, they did an admirable job. This map is not only a desert map, always a slog, and a Fog of War map, always a pain, it's also an escort level, which has never been good even once. It's a perfect storm of horrendous mechanics, creating a level that is so incredibly unfun to play, you just want it over with. And boy, you better do that fast, because if you don't beat the chapter in 25 turns, you miss the following paralogue, which contains the legendary weapon Blaze required to play the final few chapters of the game. What a mess. Compared to the Binding Blade, the chapters in the Blazing Blade are an absolute hoot, even if I think there are still several that are not the series' strongest. We cannot talk about the worst chapters in the Blazing Blade without bringing up Battle Before Dawn, which is infamous for how unfair it can be, especially on higher difficulties. It is entirely possible for Zephiel, Jafar or Nino to get killed before you could ever make your way over on higher difficulties, leaving you partly or entirely in the hands of the RNG gods. It's also a Fog of War map, which you should know by now is a problem. However, personally, I've always found this map such an incredible moment within a Leap story that I can't get myself to hate it. It's not my favorite, sure, but it is incredibly memorable and has become somewhat of an iconic moment for the game. Frankly, I've always felt the true worst map is the paralogue that directly follows this one. I don't know, maybe most people struggle so much with Battle Before Dawn they never even unlock it, but the hate that chapter gets should really be directed at Night of Farewells, as it is much worse. The entire layout of this map is narrow walkways across water, meaning it is one of the most cramped maps in Fire Emblem history. The bridges also constantly disappear, potentially leaving your unit stranded if you're going in blind. Because yeah, the game doesn't tell you this or provide any hint it's about to happen. Enemy-wise, you'll be dealing with a lot of enemies who have no problem with the environment at all, like flyers and pirates, meaning they can easily make their way to your weaker units who have nowhere to flee, mind you, and kill them off. And as the rotten cherry on top, there are also mages with Berserk and Sleep Staves, both of which are difficult to reach before they use them at least once. Such a frustrating map that has honestly made me put down the game on several playthroughs. For a much quicker entry we go to the Sacred Stones, where you can literally ask everyone for the worst chapter in the game and they'll all come back saying it's Phantom Ship. The difficulty spike on this level is insane, coming pretty early in the game but throwing a barrage of enemies, including flyers, at you accompanied by a thick fog of war. But what I honestly find the worst about this chapter is how the situation on the battle preparation screen and the turn that follows is completely different. So it's basically impossible to adequately prepare for while going in blind. And then later on, there is another ship added to the fray. And while I guess Dosla will usually be able to handle himself pretty well, La Rochelle won't, meaning you now also suddenly need to rush Ephraim over for support. In a game with pretty solid map designs all throughout, Phantom Ship is a bizarre outlier that has completely understandably become infamous. Path of Radiance similarly has a chapter that is almost universally considered the worst in the game, and I wholeheartedly agree. The Great Bridge, chapter 23, is, especially when going in blind, completely unfair. It's a nightmare cocktail of ballistas who can obliterate weaker units from a huge distance and pitfalls which only appear in this map, meaning you are completely unprepared for them your first time around. Sure, flyers can dodge them, but they'll instead get shot out of the sky by the ballistas. And don't forget, you'll have to lead Jill through this whole mess in order to recruit Har, which is something you're definitely gonna want to do. But what is arguably the most offensive part of it all? They brought this place back in Radiant Dawn for chapter 311, Just Cause. And guess what? It's also the worst map in this game. I'd say it's arguably even worse, to be honest, at least the last time the map was original and gave us Har. Just Cause is and unoriginal and annoying, which makes it even more baffling why this map was ever greenlit a second time. When we look at Awakening, I'd say we find a game with a lot of middling maps. Nothing that's too terrible, but quite a lot that are just average. As such, I would say the pick for this game is probably the best map of the video so far, considering I was struggling to truly call a map bad in this game. I've always found chapter 23, Invisible Ties, to be quite annoying, which is a shame considering it's quite a significant chapter in the game. Chrom and Robin fighting Valadar while blocked off feels a little clunky, not remotely as cool as Ike v the Black Knight did, and the rest of your army has to face an absolutely ridiculous amount of enemies in a rather uninspired layout of a map. and considering the objective is a route for some inexplicable reason, you're forced to hunt all of them down. At least at this point your units should be more than capable enough to handle it. Which is why the true worst map in my opinion can be found at the beginning of the game, being Chapter 2 Shepherds. On normal or hard mode, this map is nothing remarkable. In fact, it's probably a tad too easy, making it quite unexciting but not exactly the worst. On Lunatic and above however, now that's a different story. On this difficulty, the enemies are way stronger than they have any right to be for this point in the game, meaning you should count your blessings if you get through it with all your shepherds intact. This entire chapter essentially boils down to getting all the enemies to target Frederick and maybe Robin and then pray to the RNG gods they survive. The real lunatic is the person who came up with this idea and considered it an interesting challenge. It really isn't, it's just annoying. We move on to Fates next, where we cannot do anything else but separate Conquest, Birthright and Revelation, considering they have very few maps in common. I'll try to keep things relatively short and skip the dishonorable mentions, of which there really are a ton, especially in Conquest. Man, does this game have some infuriating maps. But only one can be the worst, being Kitsune Lair, Chapter 19. The key problem here is that you really need to adequately prepare for this chapter, but when going in blind, this is obviously completely impossible and leaves you having a terrible time. Here we are dealing with illusions, which make enemies unable to engage in combat. They can however still move, even through your units thanks to the ability Pass. And that means they can go right through your walls and tanks and end up killing your frail units before you have even realized what has happened. Now, if you brought along beast effective weapons, you would alleviate the pain somewhat, but like I said, there is no way for you to know that beforehand. And even if you did, you would still need to actually land hits, which is easier said than done in this chapter. In Birthright, my vote for worst chapter goes to Camilla, Chapter 23, which to the surprise of no one features Camilla as its boss. You'd think that by FE14, intelligent systems would know narrow hallways and endless reinforcements don't make for fun maps, but apparently not. And I even thought, why not add a constant barrage of fireballs to the mix, which is what Camilla will throw at you as a sort of modern form of the much hated Ballista. For Revelation, I feel like there's a pretty common consensus on the worst chapter, and I do nothing else but agree, being Voice of a God, Chapter numero 10, also known as the Snow Shoveling map. This map sucks so much it's not even funny. I didn't even know Fire Emblem maps could get this obnoxious, but I guess IS was adamant to prove me wrong. Nothing about this map is hard, but it takes so unnecessarily long to break all the ice and reveal the enemies. And what also doesn't help is the low amount of deployment slots, a meager 6. This chapter would have really benefited from a bit more, but I guess fun wasn't on the developer's mind when constructing this map. While we separated the three paths of Fates, we won't do the same for three houses, seeing as there are significantly more chapters that overlap this time around. And at least you can play all of them by buying one cartridge. Map-wise, I think this game's biggest problem is how often it reuses layouts between routes, but within one contained route, I consider the average chapter quality to be quite high. It says enough that my only dishonorable mention is not really for gameplay reasons, but more so story reasons, being Blood of the Eagle and Lion, i.e. the Azure Moon battle at Gronder. I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but from a story perspective, this map would have worked better with Fog of War. Because canonically, the reason why the Golden Deer will fight you here for no apparent reason is because Edelgard causes chaos to ensue on the battlefield. But when we actually play the map, I don't really see much chaos whatsoever. Dimitri attacking you in the Golden Deer route is fine, he is completely deranged at this point. It makes sense he wouldn't trust Claude. But from a Blue Lion perspective, this feels like a very forced way to get the Golden Deer out of the story. But gameplay wise, it's perfectly fine, even kinda epic, so it remains above the true worst chapter of the game, Foreign Land as Sky, the paralogue of Petra and Bernadetta. This map just straight up lies to you about its objective, and while that can make for a fantastic and memorable experience, it's not really well done here. So initially the goal is to get Petra to the endpoint, and you are under the impression that is the mission. So you might think you're doing very well by rushing Petra to this point, especially if you've made her a flying class. However, when she arrives at this point, she is ambushed by either Hubert or Catherine and a ton of reinforcements spawn, after which the mission objective changes to rout all enemies. Now, I am a sucker for changing objectives throughout a chapter, it's always awesome, but don't do it after I've already completed it. And definitely don't spawn reinforcements, who can then immediately attack and wipe the floor with your Petra, who might be completely alone out there. And if so, you will undoubtedly use Divine Pulse, meaning now you suddenly know it will happen and can prepare for it, leaving the entire twist without any sort of impact. Oh, and what is your reward for this annoying experience? A few mediocre battalions. Enjoy. And last but not least, we arrive at Engage. I think the majority of us are of the opinion that gameplay and map design is where Engage shines, and I would personally say this game doesn't have any bad chapters whatsoever. Some are better than others, sure, but this game's worst would be close to the top for say Shadows of Valentia, I'm willing to go that far. What really are the worst maps in the game though are the skirmishes, which are ridiculously difficult for some reason, making it borderline impossible to use them for the sole purpose training up your stragglers. But of course, those aren't chapters, so they don't qualify, meaning my pick for a least good Engage chapter is Heroes of the Oasis. This map has you fighting within the small, cramped streets of a village, which can be cool, but then adding Fog of War on top of it suddenly makes everything feel a little overbearing. It's not even remotely as bad as some other Fog of War maps we've seen, but the combination of little room to work with and low visibility doesn't really mash. What makes that design decision even more baffling is that it doesn't synergize at all with the new ring you get in this chapter, being Ike's. Ike's abilities would benefit much more from open areas, where enemies can crowd and surround you to showcase what it's capable of, but I guess it's up to us to find that out ourselves in future chapters. Again, not really a bad map, just the least good. And that is the worst chapter in every Fire Emblem game. Which one do you consider the worst of the worst? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed my picks, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.